Hey guys, what's up? I am back with another video and I have decided to do something a bit different. If you have watched any of my other videos, you will notice I don't talk very often, and since I haven't posted regularly in quite some time, I wanted to come back with something I haven't done before. In today's video, I will be ranking the various Jasons within Friday the 13th the game from worst to best. Now before I get started, I wanted to go over a few things. For one thing, Savini Jason will not be in this list because the majority of people don't have him, including myself, so I don't think it would be fair including him in this list. Two, I'm not including weapon swapping, in this ranking. I will be looking at each Jason with their default weapon to make it as fair as possible. And the third and most important thing I want to mention quick is this list is entirely based on my opinion and no one else's, so please keep that in mind if maybe your favorite Jason isn't ranked as high as you would like him to be on my list. Now that we got all that out of the way, let's get started. Coming in at number 8, aka the worst Jason, is Part 6. Now I know a lot of people really like this Jason, and I do apologize, but I'm just not a big fan. I have tried switching him around in my rankings, but every time I do, I just don't feel content about my list. His strengths are plus throwing knives, increased shift, and increased sense. Having more throwing knives at the beginning of the match is nice, but it's no game changer in my opinion. I think shift is the best strength in the game, and this Jason has it, which is nice. Being able to use shift more often and being very fast when in shift can make you very deadly. And finally, increased sense is pretty much useless because even Jasons with sense as a weakness can sense counselors just fine, especially if the counselor's fear levels are high enough. Now Part 6's weaknesses are minus defense, he can't run, and he has minus morph. Minus defense is kind of a tricky one. Basically, he has less HP, which means his mask can get knocked off easier, but also he isn't good at blocking or getting into combat stance. I don't really know, that weakness always confuses me, so I usually just kind of ignore it. Part 6 cannot run, which means he just speed walks, not a big deal whatsoever. And finally, his third weakness, which is the one I hate the most, minus morph. Having less morph is what really ruins this Jason for me. It honestly annoys the heck out of me. If you run into a well-organized group of counselors who are working on two objectives at the same time, you might as well just choose one and hope you clear them out fast, especially on a big map. Because you can't rely on a shift to go back and forth to objectives on a big map, or any map where the objectives are too far apart. Now, let's move on to number 7. Coming in at number 7 is Part 4. His strengths are he can run, he has increased weapon strength, and he has increased destruction. Being able to run just means you have a higher speed when chasing after counselors. Jason basically just jogs, and I don't really think it's much of a strength to be honest. Part 4 has increased weapon strength, which means you deal more damage when you hit a counselor with your weapon. This is a good strength when facing a squad of counselors trying to beat you up because you can hit them away and get them limping to try and deter them from trying to gang up on you again. His final and best strength is destruction, which means it takes less hits to break down a door. A barricaded door only needs 3 hits to break down when you have destruction, which is really nice. Plus, destruction allows you to be very relentless, especially if you pair it with being able to run. Now, his weaknesses are less water speed, less shift, and less traps. Part 4 is really slow in the water, which is a concern if there is a boat on the map. But an easy counter is to keep tabs on it by bringing out your map every so often, and if they do get it ready, just morph ahead of it and go into stock to cut it off from escaping. His next weakness is shift, which really hurts this Jason for me. Like I said previously, plus shift in my opinion is the best strength in the game, and having that as a weakness really hurts. He is really slow in shift and its cooldown is very slow. You are better off just running down a counselor if you can. Now his final weakness is less traps. Instead of having 5 like most, Part 4 only has 3. Now most people will say that this is a very bad weakness and all that, but honestly it's not a bad one at all. I can get by with only 3 traps. You just gotta play it smart, and I will get into that later on in this video. Now let's move on to number 6. Coming in at number 6 is Part 3. Part 3's strengths are he can run, he has increased weapon strength, and he has increased grip strength. Being able to run just means a higher top end speed, which isn't really much of a strength. He has increased weapon strength, which is really good against groups of counselors, and finally he has increased grip strength. Increased grip strength means it's harder for counselors to get out of your grip when you grab them. This is really only good if you're trying to get environmental kills, but otherwise you can just do a kill as soon as you grab them, which kind of negates this strength. His weaknesses are less stun resistance, decreased sense, and decreased stock. Less stun resistance means it's easier to stun this Jason, and he is stunned for longer duration. This weakness isn't that big of a deal, but it is annoying at times. Part 3 has decreased sense, which again, when I talked about Part 6, it's not a big deal at all. And finally, Part 3 has decreased stock. Stock is an ability that some people really like, and some people don't like it, or don't even think to use it. I really love using stock, but as a weakness, it just means you can't use it as long, and it takes longer for it to recharge, which isn't really that big of a deal. It's just kind of annoying. I will go over stock later on in this video. Part 3 I would say is your overall well-rounded Jason. There is definitely a reason for him to be a starting Jason. He is decent at almost all his abilities, however there is another Jason you can get when you first start out, and I would say he is the better of the two, and we will go over him soon. Okay, let's move on to number 5. Coming in at number 5 is Part 7. Part 7 actually would have been the worst Jason, but the developers recognized how bad he was and actually buffed him, which is pretty cool. His strengths are increased sense, increased water speed, and increased weapon strength. With increased sense, as I said before, it's kind of useless to be honest. Now having increased water speed is actually quite useful. If you are on a big map like Pinehurst or Jarvis House, which have a lot of water, having increased water speed allows you to really take advantage of the water and use it to travel instead of constantly using shift and morph. Also, counselors who recognize that you have increased water speed will most likely try to find another option of escape if they are looking at the boat. Part 7 has increased weapon strength, which, like I said before, is really good against counselors who like to group up together. Part 7's weaknesses are he can't run, he has less traps, and he has decreased stun resistance. Part 7 goes at a fast walk, which again is no big deal at all. He has less traps, which, like I said before, I can work with and will go over in more detail later on. Finally, Part 7 has bad stun resistance, which is more of a personal annoyance than anything. Part 7 I would say is a solid Jason, but is still pretty weak even after the buff, which is why I have him where he is. Alright, let's move on to number 4. Coming in at number 4 is Part 2. Part 2's strengths are he can run, he has more traps, and he has increased morph. As I said multiple times, being able to run is not a big deal and is okay at best. Part 2 has more traps. Instead of having 5 or 3, like Jason's with traps as a weakness, Part 2 has 7 traps, which means you can really hold down objectives, and pairing that with increased morph makes it a whole lot better. Increased morph decreases the cooldown of your morph, allowing you to use it more often, which is a very nice strength. Part 2's weaknesses are decreased shift, less defense, and less water speed. Like any Jason with decreased shift, this really hurts. If you are someone who would rather chase down counselors on foot, then this Jason would definitely be in the top 3, if not number 1. Having less defense is okay, I guess, because like I said with Part 6, it's kind of confusing and I just tend to ignore it. Finally, Part 2 has decreased water speed, which again isn't a big deal at all. This Jason is really good at objective control, but his slow shift really hurts him for me. Now let's move on to number 3. Coming in at number 3 is Part 8. Part 8's strengths are increased water speed, increased destruction, and increased stock. Increased water speed is a good strength, especially on big maps. Increased destruction is very good for keeping counselors up on their toes and not allowing them to recover stamina. And then there's increased stock. As I said before, I really like using stock, so increased stock is definitely something I like to see, and again, I will go over stock later on. Part 8's weaknesses are decreased sense, he can't run, and he has bad grip strength. As I have discussed before, having decreased sense is no big deal at all. He can't run, which again is not a big deal, and finally he has bad grip strength, which basically means that it might be kind of hard to get those environmental kills. But like I said earlier, you could practically just do a kill as soon as you grab a counselor, which makes less grip strength obsolete. This Jason is definitely a powerhouse, and many people have him as their number 1. But to me, even though he has really good strength, I just find him sluggish whenever I play as him. I don't really know why. That is just how I see him. Okay, now let's move on to number 2. Coming in as the runner-up, Part 5. Part 5 strengths are he has more throwing knives, he has increased stock, and he can run. Having more throwing knives at the beginning of the match is good, but definitely no game changer in my opinion. Part 5 has increased stock, which I really like, and like I said many other times in this video, I will go over stock in a little bit. Part 5 can run, which isn't that big of a deal. Part 5's weaknesses are he has less defense, less grip strength, and less stun resistance. Less defense I just ignore because it's confusing. Less grip strength is really only a problem if you're trying to do environmental kills, and less stun resistance is just annoying to me, but it's not the end of the world. As I mentioned before when I discussed Part 3, there is another starting Jason that is available with Part 3 right off the bat, and that is Part 5. Part 5 is definitely the better starting Jason out of the two. They are both well-rounded, however, I think Part 5 has the major edge over Part 3 with more throwing knives and increased stock. I definitely recommend Part 5 over Part 3. Alright, without further ado, let's move on to number 1. Coming in as the best Jason in Friday the 13th the game, Part 9. Part 9 is my absolute favorite Jason to play as. His strengths are increased shift, increased stun resistance, and increased stock. Increased shift is definitely the best strength in the game. Being able to use it more often, and when you are using it, to be faster and have it have a longer duration is amazing. Part 9 is the only Jason with increased stun resistance, and let me tell you, it is very nice. Increased stun resistance makes it less likely for counselors to stun you, and it allows you to get out of stun faster than other Jasons. Now, a lot of people will say all you have to do is equip a perk like Sucker Punch on your counselor, which makes you more likely to stun Jason, and stun resistance then becomes pointless. Well, even with Sucker Punch, it is still harder to stun him, and I think a lot of those people forget the fact that he gets out of stuns faster in general. So even if you are more likely to stun him, just give him a couple seconds and he'll be back up ready to chase you down. I feel like I get out of stuns much faster than other Jasons, and it's great. I believe stun resistance is definitely an underrated strength. Now his final strength is increased stock. Stock is an ability that Jason has that when you go into it, the chase music that Jason generates when you are nearby a counselor goes away. This allows you to be sneaky and trick counselors into thinking you are out of the area. You can also go into stock before morphing to an area to surprise a counselor that way as well. I love using stock. It is honestly probably tied with shift as my favorite ability. It is so much fun tricking and messing with counselors with stock. Getting a counselor to come out a window right into your grasp is so satisfying and can make for some quality jump scares. Pairing stock with shift is also very good. It is a great way to sneak up on unsuspecting counselors from far away because Part 9's shift is insane. Alright, let's move on to Part 9's weaknesses. His weaknesses are he can't run, he has less hit points, and he has less traps. Not being able to run is irrelevant, plus I think Jason's speed walk is a lot cooler than the jog. He has less hit points, which is kind of interesting. Having less hit points makes it so it takes less hits to knock your mask off. This is really only a problem if you get into a match where the counselors are trying to kill you. However, it's not that hard to stop them, plus the sweater can get bugged at times. Also, I have found that if a group can see you know what you're doing, it usually deters them from trying to kill you in the first place. Finally, his last weakness is less traps. Less traps, I would say, is probably the main reason people have Part 9 lower on their ranking list. But as I said before, having less traps is no big deal, and I will tell you why. With 3 traps, you have to use them right. I always start out by putting one at the phone and one at the battery of a car. And if a counselor was quick and got it installed right away, I put it at the driver's door. Then I look and see if there is a boat or another car. If there is a car, I put my last trap at the battery, or again, if they put the battery in already, then I put the trap at the driver's door. But if there is a boat, then I save the trap for either replacing the one at the phone if they go for the phone, or I put it somewhere at the car if they seem to really be going for the car. Don't waste your third trap at the boat. A counselor can just go around it. My advice is like what I said when I talked about increased or decreased water speed. Just keep tabs on the boat by bringing up your map every so often, and if they happen to get it started and you see that on your map, then morph a little ahead of it and go into stock and cut it off. Part 9 is definitely the best Jason in the game. He is an absolute beast and I love to play as him. I think he is by far the creepiest Jason, especially with only having one eye. Alright guys, that is going to wrap up my Jason rankings. I hope you enjoyed it, and if you did, please leave a like and tell your friends. Also, feel free to share your opinions and maybe even your own rankings in the comment section. I think it would be really cool to get some discussions going. Finally, the last thing I want to mention is if you guys ever want to play Friday the 13th game with me, just add me on PS4. My username is Casey, CASEY, all lowercase, _914. Thanks for watching, guys, and have a great day.